Welcome to ProRevenge, where today's lineup begins with a story that quite literally leaves someone with a mouthful of urine. Our first post comes from Lava Warrior, and it dates back about 8 years. At the time, I was part of a Christian missionary group traveling abroad to different countries. During this particular trip, we were in China, and our team consisted of around 12 people, an even split between men and women. We were housed in 2 separate apartments, one for the guys and one for the girls. Each of us had to budget our own weekly allowance, which covered groceries, transportation, and other personal needs. The first couple of weeks went smoothly, but before long we all noticed that food started vanishing. A team meeting was called, and we asked whoever was taking things to knock it off. Everyone had their suspicions, but no one wanted to start pointing fingers. The prime suspect was a guy we nicknamed Swiper. He was quirky, a bit socially awkward, but he had this offbeat humor that often made us laugh. On top of that, he was a germaphobe, always sanitizing his hands, wiping things down, but oddly enough, still willing to shake hands. Despite our warnings, the food kept disappearing. Our leader eventually pulled Swiper aside for a private conversation, but he flat out denied everything. Since no one had actually caught him in the act, there wasn't much else we could do. He usually struck when everyone else was out. This dragged on for weeks, and no matter how many talks or warnings happened, nothing changed. Finally, one of our team members, Peter, a loud, proud Texan straight out of Central Casting, lost his patience. He didn't like Swiper much to begin with, so he came up with a rather disgusting but effective plan. Peter decided he was going to urinate in his own bottle of orange juice, figuring that if the thief kept helping himself, he'd get a nasty surprise. Fortunately, Peter gave the rest of us a heads-up beforehand, since we occasionally shared food or drinks when asked. Sure enough, within a few days, Peter noticed the juice level dropping. One evening, with everyone gathered in the apartment, Peter casually announced, "Y'all realize I've been pissing in my orange juice, right?" He then took a swig right in front of us, completely unfazed by his own concoction. The reaction was instant. Swiper shot off the couch, panicking and shouting, practically having a meltdown in front of everyone. Peter just shrugged and said, "Well, maybe don't steal other people's food." Not long after, Swiper ended up being sent home, not just for the food theft, but also for stealing from local markets, jumping subway turnstiles, and a string of other shady antics. As for Peter, I give his revenge 8 out of 10, 6 points for pure effectiveness, and another 2 for the absolute swagger of drinking his own tainted juice to drive the lesson home. Our next post is from Assault Mouse. I was driving home when I spotted a woman waving me down from the side of the road. She was standing next to her car with a kid. Enter entitled parent and her bratty child. I slowed and asked, "Can I help you? Is everything all right?" She explained they had run out of gas. That was easy enough to fix, so I offered to drive them into town, grab some fuel, and bring them back. She agreed without hesitation, while her son busied himself by tossing gravel into passing traffic. Cars flying by at 60 miles an hour. "Hey, don't do that, buddy. That's dangerous," I warned. His mother, who was rummaging in her purse, snapped her head up and barked, "Don't you talk to my son like that." Great start. Against my better judgment, I still let them hop in my car. The kid climbed in without a seatbelt and immediately started bouncing around between the seats. I told him to buckle up, but he ignored me until his mother gave him a half-hearted shove back. By the time he finally strapped in, I was already fuming. As we drove, she criticized the state of my car, commenting on how dirty the floor was. I awkwardly explained that it was from my work boots, and she scoffed as if I'd personally offended her. Then she spotted my phone in the console and asked if she could use it, since hers had died. I agreed, and she proceeded to shout into it as if she thought volume alone would make the call go through. Meanwhile, her kid was still climbing around, nearly giving me a heart attack. Thankfully, we reached town. I pulled into a gas station, grabbed a jerry can from the shelf, and filled it up. As I came back, I leaned in and asked if her son wanted to pick out an ice cream. It was a hot day after all. For the first time, she actually smiled, and the kid lit up. Both of them hopped out to head inside the shop. That was my chance. I quietly set the gas can on the counter, told them I'd left my card in the car, and walked out. Then I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and drove away, grinning as I caught sight of her sprinting out of the station, screaming profanity after me. All it cost me was 20 minutes of my time, and in exchange, I got one of the most satisfying stories of my life. Hopefully, the poor clerk inside didn't have to deal with her wrath for too long. The last post comes from Kelsier4. Back in the early days of the internet, when dial-up was still the norm, I was enrolled in a local junior college. A little while into the semester, I moved in with my girlfriend Lucy to cut down on rent. One evening, she told me she had invited a friend from one of her classes over for game night. We invited a couple more people, and it turned out to be a really fun evening. To my surprise, Lucy's friend, Sarah, was someone I actually knew from high school. We hadn't been close, but we got along well enough. After that, Sarah started coming by often, for dinner, movie nights, or board games. Sometimes she brought her boyfriend Jay, but he never fit in. He was distant, antisocial, and always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Out of politeness to Sarah, we included him, but he clearly didn't want to be there. A couple of months later, Sarah called Lucy in tears, asking if she could come over. When she arrived, she explained that Jay had been furious about how often she visited us. He accused her of cheating, though whether he suspected me, Lucy, or both of us, she never clarified. Either way, it was absurd, but his jealousy escalated. He berated her with cruel insults, and when she tried to leave, he shoved her. She fell backward over a coffee table, hitting hard and ending up with a massive bruise across her hip and lower back. She showed Lucy the mark. Sarah insisted this was the first time he had ever gotten physical and swore it was just an accident. I didn't buy it. I was livid. Nobody lays hands on my friends, especially not a woman being mistreated by her boyfriend. My first instinct was to beat the hell out of him, but fighting isn't in my nature. I'm a big guy, but I've never been in a fight and don't consider myself violent, so instead of fists, I started thinking. That's when the idea for revenge took shape. Back then, I was employed as a student worker in the school's administration building. My job gave me access to student records, including fees, schedules, and personal details. The deadline to drop or add classes without penalty or special approval was closing in. That's when I decided to check Jay's file, grab his ID number, and gather everything I needed to set my plan in motion. On the very last day to adjust schedules, I used the enrollment phones in the admin office to cancel every single one of his classes. Not stopping there, I signed him up for as many courses with extra fees as I could. At this school, unpaid fees meant no transcripts, no records, no nothing. What made it worse for him was that Jay was an international student. Without enough credits, he couldn't legally stay in the country. I can't tell you much about what happened afterward, because I didn't want the sabotage traced back to me. I never mentioned it to anyone and avoided checking his record for a while. Still, I got a small reward when Sarah told me what she saw. She had broken up with Jay right after he shoved her, but they had shared an English class on Tuesdays. That next Tuesday, Sarah noticed Jay was there, along with another student who had no seat. The professor, realizing the class was over capacity, did a roll call. Jay's name wasn't listed. Apparently, after I dropped him, someone on the wait list was admitted. Jay argued, but the professor had the official roster and Jay wasn't on it. End of story. Sarah never saw him in that class again. Later, when I finally checked his file, all those fee-heavy classes I added were gone too, but there weren't any new classes listed either. My guess is he got kicked out, but I never confirmed it. At least Sarah didn't have to sit through class with him again. Whether he was expelled or not, he was definitely inconvenienced, and maybe even removed from school. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far, but then I remind myself, you can mess with me, but not my friends. Now, let me tell you about another story. I used to work in a convenience store where the manager was the absolute worst. He was sexist, offensive, creepy, and a bully. He even thought making jokes about cancer was hilarious. Not long after I left, he was fired for turning a job interview with a young woman into a disgusting conversation about her favorite adult content. She reported him, and that was the end of his career there. This manager, Andy, liked to think of himself as some kind of leader. Truth was, he set impossible tasks, barked orders, and then hid in his office doing nothing. One of my co-workers, Gabby, wasn't someone I got along with, but I knew she was struggling at home with her 3-year-old. One snowy winter morning, Gabby called in saying she couldn't make it. Everyone assumed the real reason was exhaustion from caring for her son, but none of us cared. She always pulled her weight and deserved a break. The shift was only 4 hours, the store was dead, and we were already overstaffed. But Andy, being Andy, couldn't let it go. Determined to catch her, he abandoned the store, serious misconduct, and drove 15 minutes to her house. He took photos of her car, driveway, and street to prove she wasn't snowed in. By the end of the week, he hauled her into the office for a disciplinary. She walked out in tears, slapped with a final warning. He didn't want a firing on his quarterly report, so he just intimidated her instead. We already hated him, but making a single mom cry pushed things too far. What Andy didn't know was that he had already handed us the perfect ammunition. At a work night out, drunk and cocky, he admitted he regularly cheated on his wife of 18 years. He had 2 teenage sons but claimed natural male hunger excused his behavior. He told his wife he worked until 11 p.m., when in reality he was off by 9 p.m. and heading straight to his mistress. One night, after leaving his mistress's place around 11:00, Andy drove off, unaware Gabby was tailing him. She had dropped her son at her mom's, waited outside the store, and followed him to his lover's house. From a parked car 3 houses down, she snapped pictures of him kissing another woman before heading inside. Not long after, Andy disappeared from work for a week. When he finally showed up, he looked destroyed. Someone had anonymously mailed those photos to his wife. She threw him out and contacted a lawyer to start divorce proceedings. His sons blocked him and wanted nothing more to do with him. Andy knew exactly who was behind it, but he couldn't prove anything. Gabby worked at the store for a few more months before moving on to a recruitment job with a pharmaceutical company, where she's still thriving. As for Andy, I have no idea if the divorce finalized. I quit a month later and blocked him everywhere. What I do know is that he was a pathetic bully who thought he was untouchable. Turns out, nobody is invincible. Watching him crumble was satisfying beyond words, so, if men supposedly have this so-called natural hunger for cheating, does that mean women have a natural hunger for catching their awful bosses in the act and ruining their lives? That was ProRevenge. If you enjoyed this story, check out my podcast for more, and don't forget to subscribe. I post new Reddit stories all the time.